The Joe Rogan Experience.
And so in that situation, and I'm probably kind of giving away too much information because the video's not out yet, but I think it's necessary. So the guy walks in. He says he's robbing the place. He hadn't shot anyone yet. But he starts arguing with another person. And the other guy's supposed to be like a new concealed carrier. And then the guy stands up. He's like, yo, what is your problem? What are you doing? And he's kind of angling towards his gun, but he's not. He hasn't gone for it yet. The other guy has a gun too, the guy who came in to rob the place. But he hasn't pointed his gun at anyone. He hasn't shot anyone. So at that point, theoretically speaking, you could argue that's just mutual combat.
Yeah.
Right? So which one can I shoot? Who's actually endangering who?
Right.
Right? So I ended up shooting the guy who came to rob the place. The problem is I shot him in the back too. But that was from the standpoint of when I decided to shoot, I know how to shoot. So I dropped 4 or 5 rounds just naturally into the guy. He's like, oh shit, he turns around because he's getting shocked as I'm shooting him. So he turns to run.
So is it like a laser that sets off like a haptic feedback?
Yeah, so you're wearing a vest, right? It's called a stress vest. So you're wearing a stress vest, and so it sends out a laser every time you hit that person, and it shocks you.
And does it shock you like a taser? Does it shock?
It's as bad as you want it to be.
Really? So you could get it to the point where it immobilizes your body?
I don't think it gets that high. I think it gets to the point where you're like, okay, get this thing off me.
Have you ever been tased?
No.
I haven't either, but I've watched people get tased, and I'm curious.
I'm not.
Because some people can just fucking handle it, man.
They can't. But aren't they usually high?
I don't know. It's a good question.
I think sometimes they're high.
But how does that stop your body from shutting off due to the electricity?
That is true. That I don't know.
Because I've seen people just get zapped, and they just stand there, and
like
they just
nothing.
pull
And
the
they pull
shit right out of the body.
Now, I did see this one video, a guy did that. The cop was being very patient with the guy. And he zapped him, and nothing. And he's like, all right. And he zapped him again, he dropped.
Really? Second time he dropped.
So I don't know what part,
Yeah.
I don't understand. That's outside of my wheelhouse, honestly.
My friend Dana White, he went for one of his shows. They all got tasered, and they felt like their body just shut off. Like they just fell over.
See, I'm not. The funny thing about it is I had the stress vest on too. So when I was doing it, so the whole time I'm like, I don't want to experience this.
Yeah.
So
that.
yeah.
So if he hit you, he turned and hit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious of what that's like. I'm sure it's horrible.
I mean, I'll put it like this: when I shot him, he yelled. So I'm assuming it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
But from that perspective, I still ended up shooting him in the back.
Now, is that legal? Because you are not in danger. You're just acting almost like as law enforcement or as protection.
So in that particular case, once we broke it down, my shooting was justified, right? But it just goes to show you how thin that line is between justified and unjustified.
And doesn't it also in that situation, was there cameras involved?
Yeah.
Because it's in a store.
Yeah.
But what if you're in a school, like in a school situation? Like if you walked in and shot that guy who was killing those kids and you shot him in the back, clearly you'd be justified. Yeah,
you'd be justified
right?
at that because that's in defense of a third party.
Okay.
Right. So at that point, all bets are off. Like whether I shoot you in the back, front, side. But I guess the argument that could be made in my particular situation is he was retreating.
Right.
Right. Because he was running out. That's why I shot him, because he turned to run away. And so it was and it happens really quickly.
Right.
And the split times between my trigger pull are pretty fast. So it's like bang, 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 bang. And that time period, he can turn and catch one in the back. But you get an aggressive enough prosecutor, that's the argument they made. If I was a prosecutor, that's the argument I would make.
You know about the case in Austin where a guy was not charged for a long period of time, but it was at one of the protests during the pandemic, and this guy apparently was military, and he was an Uber driver. He was Uber driving.
I do remember that. Yeah.
So he pulled down this road. I think he was following his GPS, and he pulled down this road, and all of a sudden he's faced with the people that were blocking the road.
Yeah.
And this guy pulls an AK-47 out and points it at him.
Yeah.
And
he shoots him.
He's a veteran.
Yeah.
I mean, he's used to being in live combat situations, and he just pulls out his gun and shoots him.
Did he get charged?
He did get charged.
Did he get convicted?
I don't know.
Okay,
let's find out what the status on that was, because all of my friends that are law enforcement or military were furious that he got charged, because this guy literally pointed the gun at his face.
Yeah.
Like he's standing there
I'd
pointing the gun. what are you going to do? It's like, how do you know if the guy's going to kill you or not?
Right.
Like, it's unreasonable to point a gun at a person in that scenario.
But you know what that speaks to?
What?
Education.
Education.
Dude, like I in my videos, I say this time and time again. We have over 400 million guns in this country, man. You're not getting away from the guns. You're not.
And if you take them away from legal people that have them legally,
The only people who are going to have them
are the people that have them illegally.
Exactly. And so if we understand that this is the country that we live in, we have a Second Amendment, we understand the culture in this country, why do we not spend just even a decent amount of resources on a federal level, on, let's say, local level, to teach people the dynamics involved with firearm ownership?
Let me ask you this. One of the things about people that are pro Second Amendment is they don't want to change any of the restrictions or the way it's set up right now. They want to keep it exactly the way it is in terms of what kind of background checks exist. And they don't want to add any sort of additional checks, any sort of additional restrictions. Why is it so easy to get a gun license?
Because efficiency.
But why is it so hard to get a driver's license?
Because people suck at driving.
But don't people suck at shooting?
Some do. A lot of people do.
A lot of people do.
The difference,
right?
though, too, is we're talking about a constitutional right versus a privilege.
When I had got a concealed carry permit, I had to go through an extensive examination, which also involved showing that you are proficient at shooting. Why don't people have to do that?
Well, because we are talking about a constitutional right. So the standard is a lot different than, say, okay, we're giving you the privilege to drive this car on the road. So like with the car, I can own any car I want. If I have private property, I can drive all over that private property without any education, without any instruction or any of that stuff. Now, the moment I want to step out into the public with this car and drive it on public roads, that's when I have to get licensed, get registration, and all of those things.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So if someone wants to have a gun and they want to take it somewhere, then they have to go through these examinations.
Generally speaking. So like,
but not
that
here.
used to be the case in Texas. Now, no. Now we have constitutional carry, which means that you don't have to go through those procedures in order to carry a firearm.
So here's the story. Uber also released a statement. Unfortunately, we aren't able to comment on pending litigation. This is about the guy who's an Uber driver. As we've released in the past, this incident is not related to the Uber platform. It says, for now, this gentleman, Perry, remains indicted on multiple charges, including murder in this case. In August, his attempt to get the murder charge dropped was denied. From what I understand, this is has to do with the district attorney in Austin. That they, we have a lot of very liberal district attorneys in this country. They just repealed the guy in San Francisco to screams and cheers of people who are dealing with unprecedented crime and homelessness there. And
don't get me started on San Francisco, bro.
Oh, you're the one who told me about it. You're the one who explained to me the whole homeless situation, and we've talked about it multiple times and credited you with explaining it. You know, since you're a lawyer and you understand like the inner workings of the machine in a way that I probably don't.
I'll be honest with you. You know what got me to understand it? It wasn't me being a lawyer. It was me being on the ground and seeing this shit and talking to the people. That's what really set it off for me. Because when I was with the NRA and we were doing these mini documentaries, going to these different places and talking to the people on the ground, they were explaining stuff to me. You can watch the video. You see it in my face. Like, I'm like, the same way you reacted is the same way I reacted when I first heard it.
I thought it was a funding thing. I thought like we need more money for homelessness. And then when I realized that it's a business, it's like a light bulb went off. When you explained it to me, I was like, of course. Yeah. It's like everything else. When you showed me the numbers and the people in LA making $260,000 a year to deal with the homeless situation and it's not going anywhere, I'm like, that person has a fucking great job.
You know, I actually analogized that to the issue with gun violence in the inner city.
How so?
So, it's a theory. Do I have concrete data to affirm it? Nope. But I think to a degree, a lot of these leaders and politicians in the inner city need that violence in the inner city to continue as a way to justify the necessity for them being in the positions that they're in.
Like what kind of positions?
So, if you think about it, the vast majority of the gun violence in this country is from the inner city. Like overwhelmingly so.
The numbers are crazy. Like when people talk about gun violence in this country, maybe we should start with that, right? Mm-hmm. Gun violence in this country, when you look at gun deaths, a gigantic percentage of them are suicides.
Yeah.
Right.
I would say about 63 to 65% are suicides.
Okay, so when we're talking about gun violence, I mean, I am not, clearly I'm not in favor of suicide.
Yeah.
You know, obviously I want people to get help and live happy lives. But this is not my main concern. My main concern is people harming other people.
Yeah.
So when we look at the numbers of gun violence, it's always exaggerated because they don't include the fact that that is
they're starting to
number.
do it now. They did it before.
Yeah, I only hear about it on Fox News.
Yeah, like they legit. I remember because this was like at the genesis kind of my 2A advocacy when I was looking at the numbers, because I kind of initially just took the numbers for what they were, and I just assumed because you hear gun violence, you hear gun deaths, you're thinking people shooting at other people in the middle of the street and dropping dead, right? And then I started looking into the numbers, and I started realizing, wait, 63 to 65% are suicides? And like point out, it's not that I don't care about suicides, but then I also backdoored and I said, okay, well, let's look at the suicide rate just as a whole in America versus other places that have strict gun laws. And I remember when I was on Bill Maher and I was sitting at the round table, we kind of started getting into that discussion. And you would think, considering we have as many guns as we have in this country in the hands of civilians, you'd think, on the surface, we'd lead the world in suicides. We don't. Not even close. So that stands to reason that the issue with suicides isn't a gun thing. It is purely a mental health thing.
Yes.
Right? So that's why I'm able to, okay, let's set this aside and now deal with what's remaining. Then you have a very small percentage that are accidental gun deaths, right? We're talking about like maybe totality in a year, 1,000.
And what percentage is that about?
I think it's like, if I remember correctly, it's like 3 to 5%.
Okay.
Or something like that.
So we're almost at 70% then.
Yeah.
We're at like 68.
Yeah. And that's including,
somewhere.
And then there's another percentage that includes officer shootings, whether it's officer shooting a criminal or a criminal killing an officer, right? So we can put that over here as well, because that's a different dynamic.
What percentage are officers shooting?
That's sitting somewhere in about also 2 to 3%. I'm probably flipping it. I don't know if the accidental gun deaths are about 2 to 3 and the officers like 5, if I'm not mistaken. But
we could find out.
Yeah.
Jamie will pull it up so we could get an accurate assessment of it.
But to get to where we want to go is essentially homicides with firearms. That's
Right.
where we want to be. And generally speaking, you got a range of about 8 to 12,000 people every year die from actually being shot by another person. That includes mass shootings, everything.
Right. And then what percentage of those are gang related?
So, because the whole gang-related, because now what's happening is they're taking a lot of the gang-related shootings and including them in mass shootings. It's just kind of like what happened in Philadelphia recently,
I
right?
see what you're saying.
They called the Philadelphia shooting that just happened recently a mass shooting.
What was the Philadelphia one?
It was basically, there was a shootout between, I don't know how many people it was, but there was like, I can't remember exactly where in Philly it was, but essentially, I can't remember, a lot of people got shot. And they called it a mass shooting. It was street violence. That's what it was. It was two parties going at it, and they called it mass shooting. I guess you could argue why that's considered a mass shooting, but it's not. But in our minds, when we think about it, a mass shooting is somebody, you have an individual or multiple people who want to go and kill as many innocent people as possible. Right? We're not talking about people who are shooting each other over disputes. This was a dispute that took place in the public between two people with guns, essentially. And so they want to call that a mass shooting. And I'm like, that's not fair, because the way to deal with these types of things, there's different. The same way you don't include the suicides and the homicides, because there are different reasons for why they're happening, right? And so a lot of the vast majority of the gun violence, the homicide aspect of it, is from the inner cities. That's where it's coming from. It's these kids, literally, when I say kids, I'm talking like 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds. They're shooting at each other. Now, I'm not dismissing that and saying that it's irrelevant and that we shouldn't factor that in. What I'm saying is it's a totally different reason for why it's happening. It's not a gun issue. It's a socioeconomic issue. Because if you take those same kids that look like me, right? I know a lot of black people or people of color who live in the suburbs of America, and they're not running around committing drive-bys in their BMWs. They're not. So what's the difference there? They have access to guns the same way these kids have access to guns. And these kids have access to guns illegally in the inner city. The difference is prolonged exposure to poverty. But nobody wants to have that conversation. And the reason they don't want to have that conversation is because it is admittedly hard to deal with. It's hard. It's convoluted and it's difficult.